Hi, everybody. I'm Candid Frank Stanisci of CFL Talk. Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV, channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download the app, make sure you rate, leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. Now, joining me is David Morassutti. David, welcome to the program. How was your week?
Not too bad. Usual stuff. Nothing.
Oh, I saw you do a Leaf podcast after the game tonight. Are
Oh,
you going to be doing any more?
yeah, I'm gonna be doing
Mr.
more.
Jinx.
Uh,
Mr. Jinx.
you know what? I blame the fact. I mean, for those that don't know, the Leafs are getting their butts handed to them 5-0 to Montreal. I think it had to do with the fact that I shaved today.
Is that what it is?
Maybe I don't know. I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not taking the blame for this one.
So you start with the back of your head and move your way forward. Is that it? You
I guess.
missed the eyebrows, buddy. You missed the eyebrows. No, I was watching that hockey game, and I could just see thousands and thousands and thousands of Leaf fans heading for the open windows, balconies. I mean, the I mean, it's just crazy. It's just nuts. Let's get on to what we're here to talk about. Being a sports fan is really tough. And in the Canadian Football League, being a fan in the Canadian Football League, um, I wanted to start with Dwayne the Rock Johnson. He made an announcement that relatively sounds the same as the announcement he made in connection with the Canadian Football League. Um, you know, it, it, they've agreed to work together or work towards being together or work towards, players' health and safety is going to be a priority, finding jobs for players. This is the exact same stuff that he said after that meeting or the preparation for meetings with the Canadian Football League.
It sounds like it. I know people are like, oh, so that means the XFL is going to become a development league for the and for the NFL, and they were quick to say no. This is not going to be one of those where players are going to get shared between teams. I think maybe it gets there eventually, but I think this is just a way for the XFL is technically is going to be competing with the NFL, but they don't want to be seen as rivals, right? They kind of want to be seen as collaborators. I think the XFL season won't clash too much with the NFL season.
In that sense, yeah, they won't
Yeah.
be up against each other.
But, the NFL probably is looking for a league that can almost like what MLB does with the rules that they adopt. They don't do them in the minor leagues. They actually use a separate league they have like an affiliation with, and they test rules there, like the robot umpires, that rule where you had the second base, someone on second base and extra innings. All that stuff was done through another league to test all that stuff. I think that's what the XFL is kind of doing right now is that they can kind of say, hey, that rule in the NFL, actually, we tried it out in the XFL first. And you kind of get that notoriety that
Well,
goes with it.
wouldn't that mean that they would have to at least start sort of like as a default NFL rules? Otherwise, changing the rules wouldn't have the same impact in the XFL that they would in the you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, I get that. I think the idea that the XFL was going to adopt CFL rules when they were doing those talks, I just don't see. I just didn't see how that was going to be a thing. I think the XFL, and based on what people down south would say about the CFL, is the rules are kind of not something that that gets to it. They want something that's closer to their brand of football, and that's four downs and things like that. The field dimensions and all those things. So I was not as I don't think the XFL was really keen on taking those things from the CFL. I mean, maybe that's why conversations didn't go as far as they went. I don't know. We don't really. The
Uh,
CFL was pretty hush hush on those details, but I think the XFL is trying its best to kind of stand away from the other leagues that are developing, like the USFL right now. I think that would be their biggest competition if you're
Yeah.
because no one's competing. Like, let's also be clear, no one's competing with the NFL.
No, there is no such thing. They're just way, way, way down the road. That's down the road a long, long way. That's a couple of weeks of overnight driving. We're in Toronto. They're in California, and they're about to hop in a plane to Hawaii. We're just not that close to them. Nobody is. The NFL is the NFL. But what it seems to me, so why would you do something like that? Why did you do it with the CFL? I think it's the same reasoning. I think they're just going out there making friends, letting people know they're around, that kind of stuff, trying to make buddy buddy with everybody. And, there could be some cities in the XFL. It's not really what they're looking for. They're looking for cities that are not NFL cities. They're looking for second tier cities. They came to the Canadian Football League and talked to the Canadian Football League, I think, more or less to have conversations, like the commissioner said, but they really weren't going to go anywhere. I mean, if the Canadian this brings us to the question of the Canadian Football League and their rules. Too many people are against the idea of changing the rules, and for the Canadian Football League to get any kind of footprint, I mean a serious footprint outside of Canada, they would have to change their rules. I don't think they could go outside, you know, our country, our understanding of the game, because I just don't think three down football, is something that you can sell in other places outside of Canada, meaning the United States. I mean, they play four down football.
That's what they grew up playing, and
That's
and
what I
let's
mean.
let's not just say the 3 and 4 downs is the biggest change. The other one is how they line up on the line of scrimmage.
How
Both
many
feet are
players?
off the ball. That's another difference. The waggle. That's
That they can handle fairly well because college
Yeah.
football has it, right?
There's
So
a lot
that
of and
it's
even
in
in the
it's in the
NFL
back
too.
of their minds, right?
In the
It's
NFL, there's a lot of motion too, and all those things. Like, there are subtle differences. It's like this is where I think a lot of CFL fans kind of get defensive. Like, it's not like a totally different game. It's just differences that make it unique, and that's why people are fighting to keep those rules and fighting to keep those things alive because it's unique to the league and it makes the league different and kind of stand out in its own way, whether people agree with it or not.
Yeah, if we change the rules, we're selling out.
Yeah, we're giving it to those who believe that three like that are not on board with the idea of the identity, or as some would say, the identity of CFL football, what makes it unique.
And can we remind everybody, because my head always hurts when we get around this part of the discussion where we're comparing the game of 1920 and 21 to the game previously to that, which was the Great Canadian Game that included a full preseason, that included a full season, that included all kinds of preparation for the season that they haven't had since then. We had preparation in 20, but we had no season. We had no preparation in 21, really, right? And it's I dislike the idea that I dislike even thinking about how the game was played, because as you know, and as anybody who follows this show and understands my opinion when it comes to the Canadian Football League, our offense sucked the last few years. It was terrible. Now, because I say that, I'm not talking about every game. I'm not talking about every game. But generally speaking, the menu was full of offensive, I don't know, i- i- failure. I mean, this is a league that if someone would have said to you in 19 before the season was to start that Michael Riley, sorry. Well, back then it was Mike Riley, so I'm I'm okay for saying it for back then. But the Michael Riley now, as he likes to be referred to, back then, and Bo Levi Mitchell would be very uh, less than impactful quarterbacks, right? And Trevor Harris didn't have the greatest of years,
Mhm.
and they're the reason that people put a label on an offense. And if the quarterbacks, we talk about this league being a quarterback league, and if the quarterbacks aren't that good, or the statistics don't rise, or the games don't score enough, you know, it doesn't. The game does not look good. The Canadian Football League had a lot of great games. Do not get me wrong, but the consistency of great offensive displays was not there. Was not there for the past few years, and I blame it on the pandemic, not the players. I blame it on defenses having an advantage under those circumstances over offenses. So I'm looking forward to. That's why my head hurts, because I'm looking forward to and hoping that the offenses will come back.
Yeah. Um, like, I think what has happened the last few years is kind of, I've had some people go to CFL games that have been real clunkers, and they're like, I can never do this again. I'm like, you really haven't gone the full CFL experience, because we've seen, I think, a lot of bad teams, like really bad teams last few years. Like the Argos were not very good, since they won
The
in
year before, yeah.
2017. The Red
Year
Blacks,
before last. The year before
yeah.
last, they were there.
You look at and I think there's something to be said about where the bad teams are. Toronto, BC, Montreal, like those teams struggled and did not look good. And I think when the entertainment factor is in there because the teams aren't competitive, that I think impacts the way people view the league as well. I said that, give the,
And you
Toronto,
forgot BC too. You could toss
yeah,
BC in there too.
right? Give Toronto a chance, give Toronto, BC, and Montreal chances to, really elevate their play. Maybe that changes a little bit in people's beliefs, and maybe that, a more entertaining product gets more people there. Because I don't think we've had that full experience yet.
When you have the most populous places in the country not interested in the game, and their attendance is going down. Now Montreal's after that started to go up. I don't see it not getting any better with new ownership there. The Argos started playing better. BC, hopefully, they're the last one of the big cities that has yet to show that they're on the right track or getting on the track, whatever that is. It's important that the Canadian Football League be um, you know appreciated, enjoyed, and talked about. And if they're not being talked about in the bigger cities, I understand people in Saskatchewan, I understand people in Winnipeg, I understand people in Alberta. I understand how much they're behind the game. But even in Alberta, you look at the way Edmonton's has played. It's been a tough while for them too.
Hmm.
So I think you're right. You obviously got something there when you talk about you know where the teams aren't playing well, for different reasons. But, you know, if you have consistently the riders playing well, that's great. It's awesome. Calgary, they had not the kind of year you're accustomed to. They became a force to be considered for first place and to be considered for making a bit of a run in the playoff. But they weren't the Calgary that we're accustomed to. And Ottawa was, so having said all this negative stuff, now I want to get to the positive part, why I say my head hurts now and I'm hoping for the best. We know that Ottawa's in good hands, at least if they're not, there's got to be something wrong, because anybody who's watching what's going on in Ottawa has to admit and believe they've got something going on. And I know from a few Ottawa fans that they're very thrilled with what's going on. Montreal, the ownership there is fantastic. Here in Toronto, they have they have a good ownership, obviously. And Hamilton has been a workhorse in the Canadian Football League and making the league better. And the Western Division is, we talked about BC, we talked about Edmonton. The other three teams are awesome. Calgary will never flounder. So the important thing to me is, can the offenses come back in the Canadian Football League? And one person you wanted to talk to, we keep looking for who are these new quarterbacks. You wanted to talk about the nephew of the Buffalo Bills, Jim Kelly. So tell me about this guy. What's going to make him possibly one of the lightning rods for interest and great football offense?
Well, and here's the thing. I saw the quotes he had about wanting to be the face of the CFL, throw for a bunch of yards, you know, show his mobility. He has he has shown that ability. The problem is I'm worried about the mental aspect in terms of his attitude and approach. Because we have seen, how many players have we seen say, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna, like, I should be able to, dominate in this league."
Oh my god.
Hasn't
You
happened.
you you mean players that drop their suitcase at wherever it is they end up before they play, and they go, "Okay, well, where are these guys that I can kick their ass? Where are they? Where are these guys that?"
The funny thing is, and I think what got CFL fans a little upset here is he says, "I know I saw." I'm going to read the quote because I have it right in front of me. "I know I saw that Doug Flutie threw for 5 or 6,000 yards in a couple of years, and I want to be like him. I want to be able to throw for that many yards and take off and run when need be." I give him a lot of credit.
He's a resident of Buffalo,
Yeah,
right? And he was living in Buffalo when Flutie was the Buffalo quarterback. I hope he realizes this isn't a guy who, plays in this other league. He played in the NFL as well
yeah.
and did a pretty good job.
Like, this is not a Doug Flutie who was just a CFL star. This is a guy who had a pretty good NFL career to go along with him. That's been the one thing Chad Kelly has never been able to do. And I think part of it, though, from what I have read and I've seen, people always look back to his personality and how it doesn't exactly rub off well on, especially NFL teams seem to have, he looks good, and he said he's put up good production when he's had chances in the NFL and like training camps and exhibition, but hasn't been able to stick around. And you and I both know, Frank, how,
We're gonna find out.
yeah, like, this is the thing I'm most curious about. What's his demeanor like? How's he going to approach this? I'm sure there's people very excited because this is a player who has a good social following, has a good fan base behind him. Those who saw him at Ole Miss, this is somebody who was at Clemson. Clearly,
Schools that have produced some pretty good CFL quarterbacks.
exactly, like, this is someone who played high level in the NCAA. This is not someone who's, you know kind of fizzled out. He's had his off-field issues, and he's worked towards that. I give him a lot of credit that he didn't let that stop his career. I'm just curious to see what can happen when you get him, on the CFL field. And here's the other thing: he might say he want to play right away. He isn't making that decision.
No, no, he can only convince somebody to make that decision. And I think, now I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Um, Now you painted a bit of a picture. Let's go on the assumption, not that you're wrong, but then we'll just go with the assumption, if you don't mind, that we'll consider that, basically a warning, something to think about. But let's assume he comes to the Argonauts. He does the work, right? Because ultimately, firstly and most importantly, anybody that comes to the Canadian Football League, if they don't respect the league they're playing in, doesn't matter what league they're playing in. If they don't respect the league they're playing in other words, the players that they're playing against, they're going to have a really hard time. Because if we learn nothing else from the Johnny Manziel experiment, is that he came in here with a bit of an attitude, and it put a very large target on him, right? Because when you give people the impression that you're above them, now you got to play on the same field with them. There are some lessons you can learn very quickly. So, I'm going to assume this Kelly kid is going to come in here and somebody's going to quickly, somebody that he trusts or somebody in the organization is going to make sure that he understands he's going to have to slow down. I understand about selling tickets, like the cockiness can sell tickets, maybe, right? So somebody might let that happen. But I think for the sake of his career, I think the dog and pony show doesn't work in the Canadian Football League. Never has, never will. We have seen stars come here who were great football players, and never mind, in his case, in Kelly's case, other players who were great in the in the NFL and came to the Canadian Football League thinking this was a cakewalk, and they learned the hard way. Great quarterbacks that came to the Canadian Football League thought they could just stand, you know, behind the center and throw the ball at will and churn up yards without even half trying. The reality caught them real quick. So hopefully somebody will protect him, insulate him, and help him to understand that this is pro football. And the reason why the Canadian Football League's been here forever isn't because they have always paid the most money for their players. They did at one time, a long time ago, 40 years ago. They don't now, but the money they pay is real. They sign a check, the player gets handed the check. If they like the amount, if they don't like the amount, it doesn't matter. The point is that check doesn't bounce. And everywhere else other than the NFL, the check isn't guaranteed. So that's the one thing that they have to understand. If you want to play for money, if you want to be a professional, for now, because the XFL sounds great, making all these conversations, as we talked about at the top of the show, all these promises, all this stuff about how good we're going to be for players and we're going to do this, we're going to do that. At the end of the day, the players that are playing in the Canadian Football League have made choices, and many of them aren't playing in the NFL for one reason, aren't playing in other leagues for another reason. And I happen to think one reason is when they come to play in the Canadian Football League, they at least get paid what they're told they're going to get paid. Now, they may not understand how much they're getting paid. They may not understand the Canadian dollar. They may not understand taxes and all that stuff, but they do understand that they're actually going to get money. How much it is their decision, whether they're happy or not, but they'll get it. It won't be one of those things where they invest in preseason, work really hard, come to the game, come to play the game, and all of a sudden the league disappears. So he better come in here respected because these guys know there's a league. These guys know there's a season going to be played, and they know there's a championship they're playing for. Every CFL player knows that. There's no doubt. There's going to be games. There's going to be hard work. There's going to be chopping wood. There's going to be a lot of work to win because it's the only, and I repeat, the only open air game other than the NFL right now.
I've also seen posts, I guess, from former players and people that work for the XFL going, it'd be nice if I got that paycheck that I was owed from the XFL. Like, let's not forget how the XFL just folded. Like,
absolutely, and every league before him.
I don't think I've ever seen. I mean, Frank, maybe you can correct me better. I don't think I've seen the CFL in a position where they say, "Well, we can't pay the players."
That has happened. There has been. The CFL has had tag days, but they've always at least come through in the end. We've had situations you may recall because maybe I'll trigger your memory where a team, the owner throws the keys on the desk and the players don't get paid, but then the new owner comes in, whether it's the new owners of the CFL or someone else, they come and they make sure the players get paid. There have been late checks, but these are the exceptions, okay? These are the exceptions that make the rule, right? So perfection is not, something that anybody can claim. The Canadian Football League, by any stretch, is not perfect, but they are as I said, outside of the NFL. If you want to play pro ball for actually getting paid for money, not for a food allowance, not for a motel room, but actually get paid. Um, we can all complain about $75,000 a year. No, we can't, because a lot of people on this planet would love to be able to work for 6 months and earn $75,000 in a year. And so we're talking, I guess, now am I confusing my base salaries? It's around that anyway in the CFL. So, you know, it's not chump change. You can talk about it that way, but in relation to doing a regular job, $75,000 for working 6 months. Yeah, you got to pay tax on it, but so does everybody else. That's the nature of a paycheck. You're going to pay taxes. Football players complain, "Well, I only take this much home." Dude, dude, we all have the same problem when we have a job. We don't get to take home what it says on the check, but you get the check and you get whatever that amount is that's left. It's yours. You got it, and that's the way it's been in the Canadian Football League. So, God darn it, it's a great league. It's fundamentally sound financially. Could it be better? Hell yeah. Could players earn more money? God, far sure they could earn more money. But is it a league that offers a check and then pays that check? I got to be careful now because I'm hearing myself talk and I keep forgetting there's also the fact that contracts can be walked away from by the Canadian Football League. But at least when you get the check, it's
Yeah,
there for you.
you're not worried. You're not worried
Before
about it not
before I
being.
start sounding like I'm ignoring the fact that players don't have guaranteed contracts, but still that's part of the business, right? You're not being asked to work for nothing. If they don't, if they're saying to you, listen, we don't need you anymore, you won't be getting paid. That's not something other people aren't used to either. That's another thing that football players have to understand, and they do, I think, down deep, that people who work for a living get fired. They don't get they don't get a chance to get paid from that company. But the nice thing about being a football player is it's easier for you to get a job in the same industry, same business, doing what you did if you get fired in football than you do if you get fired at the fish warehouse.
Yeah, and when I look at, I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for CFL players, those that are trying to get trying to make a decent living and support their family. I always look. I've had some experience, talking with players who played in the ECHL, the East Coast Hockey League. I have had to sleep in their cars because they could not afford. They had to choose between eating or having a place to stay. Like, I think when people complain about the CFL, I look to how other leagues just don't have the same sustainability, and just the quality of life is totally different. Because especially in the CFL, like, guys get together and they room together so that you know the cost of living isn't as much of a burden. And I think that's something that tends to get overlooked a little bit. And yeah, I think hopefully one day we'll get to the point where CFL players maybe get paid more. Um, it all comes down to the CFL finding ways to increase revenue outside of tickets and other means. And I think it also comes down to the players, being willing to, how do I put this? Players being willing to be partners, right? And I mean, the league also needs to be partners too. I'm not saying that it's a one way partnership. It's got to be two ways. But I think the players, sometimes they don't think about those that are coming up as much. They think about, oh, we want guaranteed salaries. Okay, well, how about maybe also fighting for the minimum salary to eventually go up? Because we see certain players that get paid quite handsomely, and then you see others that are saying that they're struggling to, you know, make enough that justifies their playing, and that affects their mentality, I think, too, in some ways.
Absolutely, it really does. And we we love the game. I can speak for you, and that feels safe. I love the game. I think we've seen it at its worst the past couple of years. It's a game that needs rehearsal. It needs practice. It needs commitment. Um, you know, it needs its fans. It needs certain guarantees that it's going to happen. I think as much as I believe, and I say this with one foot admitting I'm wrong right off the hop. but the idea now is something they haven't been able to do, players, for the last couple of years, is give totally themselves in preparation for a season. I know, I'm going to be told that I'm wrong, but how many of them actually believed there was going to be a season the last couple of years? How many of them actually could make the commitment without any doubt there was going to be a season? I'm dying. One of the first questions I'm going to ask the players, David, and if I forget to, please remind me to. Is this the season you prepared? Did you prepare differently this year than you have in the past couple of years? Did you find a commitment that maybe you were missing that you didn't realize until you got it back? So I'm hoping this is what'll have a good, great, wonderful impact, especially on the offenses, which we keep getting told are always behind the defenses when training camp opens. And I don't think they caught up. And that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that I don't like the memories of the past couple of seasons. The Grey Cup game was awesome. The playoff games were fantastic. There were games that were great here and there, but I wasn't impressed looking back at the offenses. The offenses disappointed me in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think there's a multitude of reasons for that. I mean, one of them, yes, defenses tend to be able to get ahead of offenses in preparation, and offenses haven't had that on field time that they desperately need. I think coaching is an impact too when you don't have the same number of coaches working with players because you have a coaching cap. I still think that's something that's hindering the product of the CFL, and I don't think the play has improved since the coaching cap is coming. Maybe on defense it has, but it hasn't on offense. And offense sells, as you said many times, Frank. Offenses sell tickets. Defense wins championships. I think you got to make that shirt before somebody else does it.
I think it's pretty safe that it doesn't belong to me. It does not belong to me. It belongs to football. That is basically uh, it is the definition of football. It's just a way of saying that showtime, and then there's what happens in the trenches. And you know what? Defenses win games, but I think offensive lines win games too. I think secondaries win games. I think receivers win games. I think um, sideline players who don't even get in the game win games because everybody, the beauty of football, and anybody who has taken a second or two, just a second or two to really understand the game of football, it is a one for all and all for one prospect. If you don't have that in football, if you don't have that on your football team, if you're not all playing for one and one for all, if you're not all in it together when you're in that locker room, whether you're a starter, whether you're special teams, whether you're the center of attention like a quarterback or a great receiver or a running back, if you're not all on the same page, giving the equal effort, which is everything you got plus more, you don't win. It's just that simple. Winnipeg, the Bombers won the last two Grey Cups because they played a team that gave as much as they did, but failed by just a tiny bit. The difference between what Hamilton, the Tiger Cats, gave at the Grey Cup, I don't look at them as losers of the Grey Cup. I know as an Argo fan, and someone who's pulled for the Argos, and have friends of mine that are diehard Argo fans and hate the Tiger Cats just as much the Tiger Cat fans hate the Argo fans. But the truth is, folks, the difference between the Hamilton Tiger Cats and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in both those games is so marginally small, you know? And that's why I'm saying if you have a team that isn't fully engaged in the concept of winning, you don't win. Because as much as I've been critical about the offenses, it hasn't been. I apologize to offenses in the Canadian Football League if they feel like I'm being derogatory. All I'm trying to say is they haven't been as prepared. They haven't had the same kind of opportunity that they normally get and deserve to be as good as they can. That's it for my rant.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think the level of parity might change once more teams decide to make a concerted effort to improve. Right? We won't see Ottawa being as bad as they were
Not at all.
last year. Um, Teams are trying to improve, and I think if you're, I mean, that's the first thing you want to see, in that regard. And you know what? You can either do one of two things. You can try to copy what Winnipeg did, or find a way to beat it.
It's
Hamilton
funny.
definitely came close. You know, it went to overtime. Like people forget that. We hailed the Blue Bombers as this dominant franchise, but first off, in the first season, first one time they won in 2019, they weren't the top team in the West. They had to go on the road in both games and get there. Right? They pulled off two upsets in a row, and then they dominated Hamilton because their style of play was something that Hamilton just wasn't accustomed to or ready for. And then this season, yes, they were really good during the regular season, and then in the playoffs, it got harder for them because other
Mhm.
teams kind of
Well,
were trying
the
to beat.
burden of being the champ isn't easy.
Right, you're not sneaking up on anyone anymore. You're not gonna get the jump on anyone anymore. And yeah, Hamilton could. I think the heartbreaking part was that Hamilton could have easily have won that game. They were right in there from the beginning, and they were making Winnipeg was making mistakes, and Hamilton was doing the right things. So I think, and I think that will also be true going into this season, where people are thinking maybe this is a time where Winnipeg finally starts to other teams start to catch up a little bit because they've lost some players. They haven't exactly they brought back a good part of their core, but they've lost players too. That people are thinking the cost of winning is that not everyone. At some point, players have to start thinking about themselves. A little bit. If they can get paid more, they'll take it because they've already done the winning. They have to also kind of look for themselves as well.
Absolutely. I want to apologize to you and the viewers. I'm in the middle of negotiating a guest for another show that we do, Open Forum, and I just booked him. And so the reason I'm mentioning his name right now is because CFL fans, you're going to have to watch this show because it's going to be Ron James. And what I'll say is this: Ron James is the guy that was there on the podium when Cap and Mosca had their little tete-a-tete. If all of you remember the punch and the cane. Ron James was standing on the podium. He was if I remember correctly, and I'm asking him right now. I'm, I'm messaging him with him, and I'm asking him about that. And oh, it's a wonderful story. So I get a little promotion for March 11th. We'll be having Ron James on Open Forum. It's March 11th, Friday, 4 p.m. And we'll get a chance to hear his personal view up close of the event and with his twist. Anybody that knows Ron James, he's a very funny man, and I'm very proud to say that he's decided he's willing to join us on our program. And yeah, so that'll be great. So I apologize for that, but I hope you can understand, folks. When you do 6 or 7 shows a week, every so often in the middle of the show, you get a real important message and you can't ignore it. This is one of the first times I've had to not ignore it. I didn't want to miss out on this, so I apologize. But it'll be a lot of fun. Yeah, when we talk about this kind of stuff, great. Okay, so we've established that the league we're hoping it's going to be better. We've established many times, and we've continued to today, in the hopes that we find some quarterbacks. We talked about Kelly being someone who has a little cachet. We've seen lots of players. The Argos have had a couple. We had one player that had, more followers than the CFL has. Right? We've had those kinds of people involved in the Canadian Football League. The Canadian Football League has tried everything, and selling the game in Toronto. I asked this question. I want to make sure that I asked it here. I have asked it of many people. I've asked it of reporters. I've asked it of fans, and I've gotten the same answer. I think I even asked you. And my question is this: for those of you that may not have heard it, here's your question: when was the last time that anybody out there remembers that the Argos going into training camp were the favorite to win the Grey Cup? If not then, how about after training camp, coming out after training camp, were the favorite to win the Grey Cup? Not to finish first in the East, but to win the Grey Cup. I don't think there's been a Toronto Argonaut team going into the first half dozen games. Oh no, that would be wrong because they had a season recently where they came out of the gate really well. So that might not be a good question, but to my point, David, they've got a chance now to advertise a team that's really, really good, right?
They do, but I don't think people are giving them the benefit of the doubt of being a really good team because,
I'm dying to hear that one.
like, in all my time that I've watched CFL football. It started in 2003. That's when I started like really understanding the CFL and football. The Argos were never seen as the best team. They never were. It was always Montreal, Calgary, like Edmonton. It was never really Toronto was never considered the favorite or the top team to win every year. Um, I thought it was going to change when Ricky Ray came to town, and like that's the quarterback that Toronto needed, but it still didn't. Nobody was really ready to give Toronto its due. So that's why 20.
He he left, if I can interrupt, just I promise only for a couple of seconds. But when he came to Toronto, he left Edmonton a player they didn't want. The fans literally booed him out of the stadium. So when he came to Toronto, it wasn't like he came to Toronto and everybody said, "Wow, this great quarterback." I mean, he again, this is the history of the Toronto Argonauts. They become great out of mediocrity. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. They win championships as a surprise.
They do. 2017 is still no one, nobody expected the Toronto Argonauts, who were the worst team in the CFL in 2016, to go on and win the Grey Cup because Calgary was flat out dominant that year. No one expected Toronto to have a chance in that Grey Cup game, but Toronto, as you said it, they brought in guys that maybe weren't wanted another other by other teams. I look at Cleon Lang, Sean Lemon. Ricky Ray was still hanging around. Everyone thought Ricky Ray was done after 2016. Bear Woods was let go by Montreal. That was considered a massive pickup. Nobody thought Bear Woods would come to Toronto after, in that regard. Um, I think it just speaks to kind of the unpredictable nature of the CFL in a lot of ways. The best teams don't necessarily always win the Grey Cup. Hamilton fans would remember that from 2019. That was the best team I had seen Hamilton have in a really long time, and yet they lost to the Blue Bombers, who were third in the West, and nobody expected them to be the best team in the West. So I think that's CFL football to me. It's not always the teams that are the best on paper that always win. It's the teams that play the right way at the right times in most cases. Really, it takes one game. You can go on. You can and look if you win the East or West Division, one game to get you to the Grey Cup, and then you win the Grey Cup. That's two games you need to win. It's the mentality changes in a lot of ways in that regard. So yeah, this I don't think anyone's going to give Toronto the edge this year. I think people will still give Hamilton because they went to the Grey Cup. Um, some might say because of what Ottawa has done that they kind of get closer to Toronto too. Montreal's still there too. I just think there's too many teams that have stayed either good or have gotten better to give Toronto its due. But it wouldn't surprise me if Toronto wins the East this year, just based on the way that this team has been constructed. The rookie coach is now has a year under his belt to know what works and what doesn't work. Um, everyone's going to point to the one. I talked about this before. The one thing that's going to keep them back is the quarterback position. That's the one everyone is going to point to with Toronto. if Toronto had a different quarterback, I think that had a different track record,
Mhm.
I think you'd have a different story in Toronto.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I know people are gonna be able to point out seasons where the Argos have gone out like they did this year. They've gone out last year, they did the same thing. They went out and got all these great players, right? But my point is, and here's the subtlety I'd like to remind folks. Pinball Clemens came to this organization with one goal. He didn't come to this organization to win a championship, then have a crappy team for a couple of years, then win a championship, then have a crappy team for a couple of years. He wants to have concurrent champions and at the very least concurrent teams that are in the hunt. In other words, what we're talking about here, going into the season, people expect the Toronto Argonauts to be in the hunt for a Grey Cup, like Hamilton has been the past few years, correct? I mean, there's nobody that can deny that Hamilton has been the example that Pinball Clemens wants in Toronto. That's exactly what he wants. And people in Hamilton should be very proud and grateful. And the organization should be thrilled with the idea and proud of the fact that they built that kind of dynasty, if I can call it that. Yes, they haven't been able to take the last step, but I think the Argos will say, well, they'll show them how to do that. Don't worry about that, Ticats fans. The Argos will show, that's what the Argos can say, right? I'm just giving a little shot to the Ticat fans. Sorry, couldn't resist. That's just the way it is, right? That the greatness of Hamilton is something that has to be respected, and that's what Pinball wants. So what he wants to do now is he had a team that finished first, right? They blew it. They blew the semifinal game, before the Grey Cup. In other words, the Eastern Final. They go back in there now. They've got a team that finished first. So they have a kind of a crown, just like Hamilton. They won the East Division twice, went to the Grey Cup. They have the crowns to prove that they are a great team and a team that can challenge for the Grey Cup. They've been there. Toronto can say that too. In this past years, they finished first. They should have made it to the Grey Cup. They didn't. But now the next year following that, no one should be surprised. And then they bring in these guys that are real winners in Harris and Banks, and put them on top of the rest of the guys that they had in here. This is a team that I don't know how the Argos don't or can't give fans here a belief that they should get their season tickets because they should be at the games from the beginning to be a part of the adventure towards a Grey Cup. Not like the fans I've been a part of for years, involved with directly with fans for years, when they won a championship because don't know why. They just happened to be the right team at the right time. Ricky Ray showed them how to get there, made a couple of plays, you know, and it always comes down to a couple of plays. So, winning the Grey Cup and being a favorite from the beginning, that's a pretty good feeling. And in case you have any doubt, folks, call your Winnipeg Blue Bomber fans. Ask them how they feel about game 1. And that's what I'm thinking Pinball wants to sell. That come game 1, they're already not looking ahead, but knowing their team has a chance to be there.
Yeah, and instilling that belief from day one.
Right.
It's I think a lot of Argos players that are there right now that they brought in this season, they'll have that belief from day one. They'll say we have to earn it. They'll say every week is, they're not going to look towards the Grey Cup, but they're going to know that from day one, that's the goal. That's where they want to be. So it'll be very interesting when training camp comes around. I did have something. I don't know what you had planned for the final parts of the
Well, what
show.
do you want? What do you? No, I'll just running through some stuff. Yeah, to tie. I'll tie up the loose ends here. Then, if you want to talk about something else, let me tie this up. So, so if you look at it now from the East Division, there is not an East Division team that's going to start this season not thinking they could make it to the playoffs. A, B. We all know that that's all you have to do when it comes to the CFL. Make it to the playoffs. You could win the Grey Cup. It's just a question of 2 games, getting a 2-game winning streak. Looking over at the West, BC's going with 2 Canadian quarterbacks. They may not be competitive in that tough division, but David, there's going to be some interesting developments there if those 2 Canadian quarterbacks actually are the quarterbacks this season. That's going to be something to talk about, to view, and to be proud of as Canadians. Then, of
That
course, you go ahead.
that and the move they just made to BC becoming the first team to have a female assistant coach in the league.
Right. Great stuff there. If they can't win, that's great that they're doing some stuff that's going to set them up to be a winner. And then you've got the other 4 teams fighting for the 3 playoff spots because I don't think there'll be a crossover, needless to say. Edmonton has something to prove. They have something to prove. Is there anybody in football that we know in this situation that could bring a winner to Edmonton more than Chris Jones? No, my friends. He's there. If you're in Saskatchewan, Winnipeg, and Calgary, I know they're going, oh God, you know, we got to really play well because there's no crossover, and Chris Jones is going to take one of the spots. So there's only 3 chairs, 4 teams. So that's my wrap of the season's going to be interesting. It's going to be, I hope, one of the best seasons that we can look back on in Canadian Football League history. What you wanted to talk about?
So it was interesting. So I'm gonna the NBA All Star Weekend. Adam Silver does his usual talk with the media, and he got a lot of people a little upset in saying that the NBA is considering removing media from having locker room access when COVID, like they're not doing it now because of COVID, and they're not planning to bring it back when COVID is, a thing in the past or not as severe as it is now. And I found that to be very interesting. I also found that to be dangerous.
Dangerous in
Right.
what sense?
In what sense is that, I have no problems with making sure safety is top priority, especially for players and staff and all those things. But when you consider, I I've seen the struggle for a lot of journalists to get the stories they want because they don't have the access to players in the same regard,
Right.
right? I don't need to be in the locker room, but you will see teams maybe I think you're gonna I'm worried that this is gonna be a change in the dynamic of how interviews are conducted.
It's funny you should say that because we're seeing um, more and more criticism of players, um, almost personally being criticized, and we're seeing an attempt to insulate players in that sense because NBA players make so much money. They're more like a personal business than they are an athlete, especially basketball players. I don't think there's a league that has players as attached financially in the business world as deeply and widely as the NBA players. So, you know, we do that in the Canadian Football League. We go into the locker rooms, right? We talk to the players. What makes those interviews when we go in there so compelling is that they are comments immediately after a game or as soon after a game as the team can allow.
Mhm,
Things are said in the heat of the moment. Every fact is still recalled and unfiltered or filtered less than it would be if they're sitting at a podium, right? Is I think what your point is.
mhm,
And you can limit who talks and the players, you know, they're more, I think they're safer sitting at that dais than they would be standing there with the intimidating factor being 6 microphones in your face, 8 people standing around you, 10 people standing around you, even in the Canadian Football League. So I can't imagine what it's like at a Leaf game or a Raptor game, NBA, NFL. My goodness, I've seen some of those scrums. Who needs it, right? So they could have the power to eliminate that. Um, the only, in my opinion, since we're talking about it, the only thing that might stand in the way of it, the owners think it'll unsell the game a little bit, then it won't happen. I don't think.
Okay, well, I think that that was a good point because I think the CFL definitely needs the media attention more. I mean, I know we're tight for time and we have to finish. I think the important thing here to remember too with the NBA, and I think what they're forgetting is Michael Jordan used to have massive press conferences before every game. It used to be a show to listen to Michael Jordan talk. I think the landscape has changed with social media and all those things. But I think people who have had a negative view on the media and this and
Oh,
interaction with athletes need to remember that we're not looking for a bad story. We're just there to get whatever story comes out, and we can help sell so something for fans to consume.
oh, absolutely, 100% right. You couldn't be any more right. It is what it is. Well, you know what? We can pick up on this conversation later. It
Okay.
was fun having the conversations we had today, David. Enjoy enjoy your Leaf podcasts, but maybe not this week. I know we do one too, so it's not a pleasure to cover the Leafs right now because the negative conversation, no matter how hard you try, we try to be unbiased, but sometimes the negative stuff is there. It's just, it's sitting on the tee, folks. There's nothing you can do about it.
Mhm.
Thanks, David, for this.
Thank you, Frank.
All right, for David Morassutti, I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. Thank you for watching CFL Talk. Airing live Mondays at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network. For CFL Talk, news, entertainment, and other sports programming we offer, please check out SpanglishWorld.ca. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm Candid Frank. See you next time.